I have come to believe that pain is a disguised envoy from a kingdom we have not yet fully entered. It is not the tyrant it first appears to be, nor the mere chaos of a hostile universe, but a stern messenger rapping at the locked door of my comfortable illusions. Pleasure lulls, success flatters, routine muffles the alarm clock of the soul. But pain, how unceremonious it is, pulls back the curtains at dawn and floods the room with an honesty that cannot be negotiated. It asks what I love most, what I trust truly, what throne governs my choices when the ornaments of life are stripped away. This is why I call it severe. It refuses flattery and will not bargain. And yet I call it mercy, for it rescues me from the half-truths that would keep me numb, and it tutors my heart toward the brightness for which it was made. I must begin with an admission. Left to myself, I prefer a gentle providence, one that oils every hinge and softens every road. I would much rather be improved by compliments than corrected by affliction. Yet experience has taught me that I rarely grow under the warm lamp of admiration, while I almost always awaken under the bracing wind of loss. When the path is easy, I am tempted to take my ease for progress. When the air is thin, I begin to learn how to breathe. To say suffering is a mercy is not to say it is pleasant. A surgeon's blade is not kind to the skin, and a gardener's pruning shears do not flatter the vine. Still, the blade and the shears are instruments of health, because they do not consult the patient's momentary comfort, but the patient's ultimate good. I find that love worthy of the name refuses to abandon me to the worst of my ailments, my self-sufficiency. The love that formed me aims not merely to soothe, but to sanctify. It would rather heal me at cost than leave me unhealed in ease. This world, with its mixture of shadows and light, often serves as a training ground for our desires. We imagine we want only happiness, but our hearts are wayward and content to graze on stubble when wheat is promised. Pain exposes this miserliness. It turns me away from the counterfeit and toward the true. It is like winter in the soul. The leaves I thought were permanent are stripped, and I learn which branches are living wood. Winter is severe. Winter is also merciful. It prepares the orchard for spring. Suffering also clarifies the map by which I travel. When the day is bright, the stars are invisible. When the night deepens, constellations appear. In the obscurity of grief or disappointment, I find that the fixed points of the moral sky blaze brighter. I remember that character outranks comfort, that eternity outweighs the present hour, that the soul is larger than its circumstances. A life without difficulty tempts me to interpret reality by the thermometer of my feelings. Hardship insists that I interpret my feelings by the compass of the true and the good. We must avoid a mistake. To call pain merciful is not to baptize every ache as holy, nor to pretend that evil is good. There are cruelties in the world that God hates more than we do. There are injustices we are commanded to resist, heartbreaks we are permitted to lament. The mercy lies not in the wound as such, but in what grace is willing to make of it when we entrust the wound to the healer. The cross has already answered the question of whether God knows our agony. He has taken it up into himself. Our sufferings are not payments, they are invitations, occasions in which the pattern of that great love may be worked deeper into our small lives. In my own seasons of trouble, I notice that pain interrogates my idols with a patience I usually lack. It asks, On what do you stand when favorable weather departs? Whose voice defines you when applause is silent? What remains when the scaffolding falls away? If the answer is nothing, then pain has mercifully revealed the void. If the answer is God, then pain has mercifully revealed the rock beneath the sand. Either way, the revelation is a gift, though it may sting to receive it. There is also a curious alchemy by which suffering enlarges love. A heart that has known sorrow becomes spacious, like a house where many have been consoled, and so many chairs have been added around the fire. The person comforted in darkness learns the dialect of other people's midnights. He becomes gentle with the breakable and patient with the slow. Perhaps this is one reason heaven's joy will not be shallow. It will be the joy of the once wounded, the gratitude of the once lost, the music of those who learned by hunger to savor bread. How then shall we walk when affliction visits? Not by theatrics, but by fidelity. We may practice the small obediences that refuse to dramatize pain, and instead consecrate it. We can keep the daily promises, to pray when we do not feel it, to forgive when the ledger pleads against it, to serve when no one notices, to cultivate gratitude for the simplest mercies. A sunbeam on the floorboards, a human voice we love, the taste of water. These are not decorations upon a stoic life. They are the lifelines by which we are drawn from bitterness into hope. Hope, too, becomes sterner and stronger in trial. When earthly goods are withdrawn or threatened, I learn to expect more from the country for which I was made and less from the inn at which I lodge. Pain trains the eyes of my heart to look through the lattice of this world toward a further horizon. This longing is not escapism. It is the homing instinct of a soul that has remembered its origin. If the present is so weighty, what must the future be like that it casts such a shadow backward across time? At last, I begin to see why mercy comes clothed in severity. The physician who refuses to lie about my illness has already borne the worst of it. The gardener who prunes has endured the winter and knows the spring. The teacher who corrects also crowns. Therefore, I may receive the hard gift with open hands, not because I relish pain, but because I trust the giver. And when the night feels longest, I can whisper what I have learned, that the wounds of love do not end in wounds. They open into glory. When we speak of suffering, we cannot help but feel its weight in personal terms. Each of us knows what it is to be wounded in ways that others cannot fully see. There are losses no words can quite contain. The empty chair at a table, the unopened letter, the future that collapsed like a bridge half built. Such sorrows are not abstractions. They are carved into our very being. And yet, precisely because they are so real, they may also be transfigured into something more enduring. I do not mean that time itself heals all wounds. It does not. What it does is give us space to discover that the wound may be repurposed by grace. Scar tissue, though it stiffens, is also stronger than the skin it replaces. So it is with the soul. Once broken, it can, if surrendered, become more resilient, more tender, more capacious. Suffering is never wasted when it is brought to the altar of God. It becomes a strange currency. Pain translated into wisdom, tears distilled into compassion, loss into longing for the only love that cannot be taken away. Consider how suffering refines desire. Our longings are many, often entangled, like vines curling around one another. We hunger for comfort, recognition, safety, pleasure, and permanence. But not all these hungers are equal, and not all can be satisfied here. Pain, in its rude honesty, separates the eternal from the passing. It whispers that what we thought indispensable can in fact be lost, and yet life continues. It teaches us to relocate our hope, to seek the fountain rather than the cistern, the sun rather than the lamp. In this way, suffering becomes a teacher of holy desire. I find that the greatest saints are not those who never tasted bitterness, but those who learned to drink deeply from the chalice and yet sing. They are marked by wounds, but their wounds have become windows. Light passes through them with a purity that unscarred souls rarely know. They have learned what I still only glimpse, that one can rejoice not because suffering is absent, but because Christ is present within it. For the presence of God does not always come as deliverance from trial. Often it comes as companionship within it. Indeed, the cross itself reveals the paradox. The worst evil that ever befell this world, the crucifixion of the Son of God, was simultaneously the greatest mercy ever extended to it. Out of pain unspeakable came redemption unmeasurable. If God can transmute that darkest day into the dawn of salvation, then there is no night of ours too starless to be used for His purposes. Our sorrows, however heavy, are fragments of a story that will be redeemed. And so, when the hour of affliction presses upon us, we may resist the temptation to interpret it as abandonment. Rather, we may dare to interpret it as invitation, an invitation to trust more deeply, to love more broadly, to hope more fiercely. To receive suffering as severe mercy is to say, I would not have chosen this, but if you, Lord, can work through it, then let it be. In that surrender lies freedom. For what else can the world take from the one who has already placed every treasure into God's keeping? Losses still hurt, but they no longer own us. Wounds still bleed, but they no longer define us. Suffering still arrives, but it no longer has the last word. The last word belongs to resurrection, to joy, to the homeland of the soul, where mercy shall be mercy without severity, and love shall be love without loss. And when that day comes, we shall look back upon the trials of this world not as meaningless accidents, but as the very chisels that shaped us for heaven. We shall say that every pang was, in truth, a hidden kindness, every tear a preparation for the weight of glory, every night a prelude to the morning. This is why I call pain a severe mercy. For though it strips, it also clothes. Though it wounds, it also heals. Though it humbles, it also exalts. It is God's way of pulling us, sometimes unwilling, out of the shadowlands into the light of His eternal presence. There is a curious irony in the human condition. We spend much of our lives attempting to avoid suffering, yet it is precisely in the places we try hardest to escape that God often meets us most powerfully. The man who shields himself with constant diversions, endless pleasures, ambitions, distractions, may succeed in postponing sorrow, but he will also postpone depth. His life becomes like a house with painted windows, bright from the outside but dark within. Pain, when it finally breaks through, smashes those panes and lets in the light. The saints and poets have long known this secret. The psalmist declares, "It was good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes." Those are not the words of one who enjoyed his wounds, but of one who discovered that through them he could see more clearly. Pain taught him what prosperity could not. Pain carried him to truths that comfort would never have whispered. And is it not the same for us? Think of the times when life was sweetest. Were they not often preceded by moments of stripping? A friendship became dearer after reconciliation from conflict. A meal tasted richer after fasting. The breath of spring more fragrant after winter. In much the same way, heaven itself may be so glorious precisely because we have tasted earth's sorrows. Without suffering, joy might be shallow. With suffering, joy is profound. We must not romanticize it, of course. Suffering is hard, often brutally so. It can break the proud man and bewilder the gentle woman. But perhaps that breaking and bewildering are the very instruments by which we are refashioned. The seed does not sprout without first splitting. The caterpillar does not fly without the chrysalis crushing. All new birth involves a kind of dying, and all dying, at least in the hands of God, prepares for resurrection. Here, then, is the mystery. Pain is not the end of the story. It is a penultimate chapter, severe in tone, but preparing the reader for a resolution more wonderful than he dared hope. We will one day look back with the eyes of eternity and see that the darkest valleys were lined with unseen lilies, that the heaviest burdens strengthened muscles we did not know we had, that the nights we thought starless were filled with galaxies beyond the reach of our mortal sight. So, dear friend, if you find yourself wounded, do not suppose the wound is meaningless. Do not imagine that God has turned his face away. Instead, imagine that you are being prepared for something greater than you can now conceive. Mercy may come with a thorn, but it is mercy still. And the one who bore the ultimate thorn, upon his brow, upon his flesh, has already walked ahead of you into the night, and waits with dawn in his hands. I have often thought that suffering, while it feels like exile, is in truth a summons home. When a man discovers that his comforts no longer satisfy him, that his ambitions taste of ash, that his body rebels with weakness, he is being reminded that he was never meant to pitch his tent forever in this wilderness. Pain unclothes the illusion that earth is enough. It whispers, with an honesty both dreadful and liberating, "You are a pilgrim still. Your heart will not rest here." To call suffering a gift is not to call it pleasant. Rather, it is to say that in its unwelcome presence lies a hidden invitation. If joy tells us this is a foretaste, sorrow tells us this is not the end. In both, heaven calls. The laughter of a child, the ache of a funeral, the sweetnesses of music, the silence of loss, each one points beyond itself. Both ecstasy and agony act as signposts, but agony is the one we least wish to read, though often it proves the clearest. Consider the cross. The disciples, when they beheld their Lord crucified, believed it to be the catastrophe of all hope. Yet, within that most appalling of moments was concealed the world's redemption. From the wood of torment blossomed the tree of life. So too, with our lesser sufferings, though they may appear barren, they are fertile in ways unseen. The furrows carved by grief may yet receive the seed of glory. And perhaps this explains why heaven will not merely erase sorrow, but transform it. Scripture does not say that God will cause us to forget our tears. It says He will wipe them away. The memory remains, but now it is transfigured. The very things that once seemed unbearable will become by some miracle of grace woven into the tapestry of our joy. What felt like a wound will be revealed as a seam, binding our story to the story of Christ. It is worth noting that suffering, more than any other tutor, exposes the poverty of self-reliance. The man who believes himself strong is like a sailor who thinks he commands the sea. One storm, and the truth is plain. He is carried, not carrying. Pain humbles us into honesty. It strips away our disguises and shows us to ourselves, weak, dependent, needy. And though this humbling stings, it is a kindness, for only those who confess their need will discover the one who can meet it. Thus, I say again, pain is severe, because it spares us no illusions. But it is mercy, because it spares us from living and dying within those illusions. And if, in the midst of it, we turn our gaze upward, we find that God has not abandoned us in the wilderness. He walks with us, bearing the weight we cannot bear, and whispering promises more enduring than our agony. If I may press the thought further, suffering not only purifies but also unites. It binds us to one another in a fellowship that is deeper than mere sympathy. To share in joy is pleasant. To share in pain is sacred. A friend who has wept learns the language of another's weeping. A heart acquainted with sorrow becomes fluent in consolation. Thus, through suffering, our souls are knit together with threads invisible, but unbreakable. The Church itself has been formed in this way. From her earliest days, persecution was her midwife, and martyrdom her baptism of fire. What was meant to extinguish her instead refined her, like gold passed through flame. This is not to glorify cruelty, but to testify to a mystery, that God's mercy runs even along the fissures of human malice. Pain did not destroy the Church. It deepened her roots and spread her branches wide enough to shelter the nations. On a more intimate scale, suffering can shape the inner architecture of the soul. The man who once mocked prayer may learn to whisper it through tears. The woman who thought herself self-sufficient may learn to lean on the everlasting arms. Children who know loss too early often grow into adults with wisdom beyond their years, not because loss is good in itself, but because grace is astonishingly able to transmute it into depth. As iron is strengthened by the hammer, so the human spirit in God's hands is tempered by affliction. It is also worth observing how suffering alters our perspective of time. In comfort, days blur and years vanish unnoticed. But in sorrow, each moment carries a peculiar weight. Pain slows us, teaches us to notice. The flicker of a candle, the sound of rain, the touch of a hand. The mercies we once overlooked are magnified. A sip of water becomes a benediction. A breath taken without anguish becomes a gift beyond price. Perhaps eternity itself will be like this, every moment saturated with meaning, every detail radiant with joy. I will not deny that pain often raises questions more quickly than it answers them. Why me? Why now? Why this? These cries echo through the caverns of every heart, and yet even when answers do not come, presence does. God does not always explain himself, but he does always give himself. In Gethsemane, he chose to be with us in our agony. On Calvary, he bore it himself. This is not a God who stands at a safe distance issuing commands, but one who steps into the fire and calls us to walk with him through it. Thus, when I speak of severe mercy, I am not romanticizing the thorn. I am recognizing that the thorn, when placed in God's keeping, may bloom into a rose. And when the last chapter of the great story is unveiled, we shall see that even the darkest sentences were necessary for the full glory of the tale. For in his book, no tear is wasted, no cry unheard, no wound unredeemed. I sometimes think that the deepest sorrow of man is not that he suffers, but that he suffers without understanding. A pain we cannot interpret feels like chaos, and chaos is nearly unbearable to the human spirit. But when pain is illumined, even faintly, by the conviction that it may serve a purpose beyond our sight, then the burden, though still heavy, becomes bearable. For purpose is the lamp that can light even the narrowest valley. And yet how cautious we must be. It is not for us to rush to others with neat explanations of their wounds. To do so is to cheapen mystery and to wound again. What we may rightly do is to sit with them in silence, to weep with them, and to hold hope on their behalf when their own grip upon it has loosened. For in that act we imitate the Christ who bore not only our sins but our griefs. He did not explain away our sorrow, he entered it. This is why I believe heaven will be more than a healing. It will be a kind of unveiling. We shall see that the scattered fragments of our lives, which seemed so jagged and cruel, have been fitted together into a mosaic of breathtaking design. The story we thought to be disfigured beyond repair will appear, from eternity's vantage, as a perfect composition, in which even the darkest hues intensify the brilliance of the light. Our task now is not to demand full sight, but to walk by trust. For the one who leads us is trustworthy, even when his road bends steeply downward. Faith is not blindness. It is sight of another kind, the ability to glimpse, through the mist, the outline of a greater reality. And suffering, harsh though it is, clears the eyes of the soul until they grow keener for that vision. Think of the prodigal who found famine in the far country. The famine was not his punishment only, it was his mercy. Without it, he might never have remembered his father's house. In the same way, our famines, our emptiness, our nights of hunger, can awaken us to a home we had all but forgotten. Pain becomes the bell that calls us back to the gate. Severe, yes, but mercy still. And if in this world mercy must often come dressed in severity, in the next it shall be clothed only in joy. There, every longing shall be satisfied without loss, every love secured without fear, every wound healed without scar. Then we shall say with astonishment, was it possible that such glory could grow from such grief? Until that day, let us walk on with patience, bearing the thorns with hope of roses, enduring the winter with certainty of spring, trusting that no suffering is wasted in the hands of the God who works all things for good. There is, I think, one final depth into which pain presses us. It compels us to wrestle with God himself. In the hours of comfort, we may speak of him as an abstraction, a principle, a vague benevolence hovering at the edges of our thought. But when agony comes, that will no longer do. We demand to know if he is real, if he is present, if he is good. Pain strips away the polite religion of theory and drives us to the living God. It is then that faith either collapses or becomes utterly in earnest. For faith, at its core, is not the belief that we shall be shielded from all harm, but the trust that no harm will be final. It is not the expectation of unbroken ease, but the assurance that even the hardest road is still a road home. Pain, severe though it is, drives that truth into our bones in a way no lecture could. And is this not mercy, though it comes wrapped in thorns? For what greater kindness could there be than to be driven into the arms of the only one who can finally hold us? If he must wound us to awaken us, then his wounds are healing. If he must strip us to clothe us, then his severity is mercy indeed. This is why I cannot look upon suffering as meaningless. To believe it meaningless is to despair, but to believe it woven into a larger tapestry is to endure with hope. And hope is not wishful thinking. It is the steady anchor that fastens us to the promise of a world made new. So let us not despise our trials, though we may rightly lament them. Let us receive them as instruments, chisels in the hand of the great sculptor. The marble does not enjoy the strike of the hammer, but it is becoming something it could never imagine. So it is with us. Every blow, every cut, every season of darkness is shaping us for the image of Christ. Severe mercy indeed, but mercy still. And on that day, when the chiseling is finished, when the wounds are healed, when the shadows give way to the true morning, we shall look back and say, even the darkest hours were filled with light unrecognized. Even the deepest wounds were carved by a loving hand, and the mercy which once seemed severe has become the very crown of glory. If I have spoken long about pain, it is because it is the universal tutor of mankind. None escape its classroom. It visits the child in tears of loneliness, the young man in disappointments that cut deeper than he dreamed possible, the mother in labors of body and heart, the elder in the frailties of age. And yet, though pain is impartial in its reach, it is not impartial in its effect, for it will either embitter or ennoble, either drive us into rebellion or draw us nearer to God. The choice, under grace, is ours. In my own reflections, I have come to see that suffering is one of the strange proofs of our dignity. For if we were only animals, if our lives were only the flutter of a candle in the wind, then pain would be nothing more than nature's indifference. But we protest against it. We cry out that it is unjust, that it should not be so. That protest is itself evidence that we were made for something more, that our souls instinctively remember a homeland where every tear will be wiped away. Pain, then, is not the end of the story, but the whisper that another story is breaking in. And how shall we respond in the meantime? Not by denial, as though pain does not exist. Not by despair, as though pain has the final word, but by trust, a trust that has been tested, refined, and proven in the fire. We lean upon the God who entered our pain, who bore it upon the cross, and who rose to declare that even the grave is no longer master. In his wounds, we see that pain is not the ruler of the world, but the servant of redemption. There will come a day when all suffering is transfigured. The scars that once shamed us will shine with glory, for they will be the places where God's grace has entered. We shall find that not a single tear was wasted, not a single sleepless night forgotten, not a single loss left unredeemed. The severe mercies will be revealed as gentle mercies, the hard roads as the straightest path home. And then we shall bless the very thorns that once pierced us, because they led us to the rose of Sharon. So, my friends, let us walk with courage. Let us not flee the lessons of affliction, but receive them with the humble faith that God knows what He is about. The shadows are long, yes, but they fall only because there is a greater light behind them. And one day, when the morning of eternity dawns, those shadows will vanish altogether, leaving only radiance. Until that day, may we bear one another's burdens, comfort one another in sorrow, and hold fast the hope that does not disappoint. For pain is not the end, it is the threshold. Beyond it lies joy, immeasurable and eternal. If these reflections have touched you, I invite you to walk further with us. Like this message, if it has offered you strength, share it that others too may find hope. Comment with your own story that we may encourage one another, and subscribe so that we may continue together this pilgrimage toward the light that never fails.